The freezing wind howled through the empty streets as Tom pulled his thin jacket tighter around his body. He had just finished the late-night shift at the animal shelter, exhaustion weighing down his every step. The parking lot was almost deserted, the glow of the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. He fumbled for his car keys, his breath coming out in white puffs against the December air. Just as he reached his car, a sound cut through the night, a faint, desperate whimper. Tom froze. He turned his head, straining to hear through the howling wind. There it was again, a soft, pitiful cry carried on the bitter breeze. His heartbeat quickened as he turned back toward the shelter, scanning the dimly lit surroundings. Something wasn't right. Using his phone's flashlight, he followed the sound, stepping cautiously around the side of the building where the trash bins lined up against the brick wall. Then he saw it. A dog, barely more than skin and bones, tied to a rusting metal pole. The German shepherd's fur was matted with dirt and ice, its ribs painfully visible beneath the shaggy coat. Its body trembled violently, whether from cold or fear, Tom wasn't sure. The dog barely lifted its head as he approached, its dark eyes filled with exhaustion and something else, something deeper. Fear. Mistrust. But beneath all that, a flicker of something still alive. Tom's heart clenched at the sight. Someone had abandoned this dog here, in the dead of winter, with no chance of survival. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements measured. "Hey buddy," he murmured, his voice gentle. The dog flinched but didn't move. Its breath came in short, rapid gasps, each exhale a cloud of white mist. Tom's fingers hovered over the rope binding it to the pole, thick and knotted cruelly tight. The shelter had strict policies. Any stray had to be reported, processed, evaluated. If the animal was too aggressive or too far gone, Tom knew what would happen. And looking at this dog's condition, he already knew the outcome. The shelter wouldn't take a chance on a dog like this. The dog's eyes met his again, and something in Tom snapped. He couldn't leave it. He wouldn't. His hands worked quickly, his fingers numb from the cold as he untied the rope. The dog didn't resist, but it didn't move either. Its body remained tense, muscles coiled as if bracing for another blow. Tom swallowed hard. "I got you," he whispered, shrugging off his own jacket and wrapping it around the dog's frail body. The wind bit through his thin shirt immediately, but he ignored it. Carefully, he scooped the animal into his arms, startled by how light it was. The dog let out a weak whimper, but didn't struggle. Tom hurried back to his car, every step feeling urgent, his pulse pounding. He yanked the door open and placed the trembling dog onto the passenger seat, adjusting his jacket to keep it warm. The interior light illuminated the dog's face, revealing old scars crisscrossing its muzzle. A history of pain. Tom exhaled sharply and climbed into the driver's seat. As he started the car and turned up the heat, he glanced over at the dog. It was watching him now, wary but no longer flinching. Tom tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Let's get you warm, buddy." The drive home felt longer than usual. The dog remained curled up, shivering beneath the fabric of Tom's jacket, but it made no attempt to move. Tom could see the exhaustion in its posture, the way its body sagged against the seat. He didn't know what this dog had been through, but he knew one thing: it had been through hell. And now, for the first time in who knew how long, it wasn't alone. As he pulled into his apartment complex, he turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the dog. Was he really doing this? He knew the risks. If the shelter found out, he could lose his job. If the dog was too traumatized, too dangerous, he could be putting himself in harm's way. But then the dog shifted slightly, its nose pressing into the warmth of Tom's jacket, as if seeking comfort. And just like that, the decision was made. Tom stepped out into the freezing night, lifting the dog carefully back into his arms. The cold air burned against his skin, but he didn't care. His apartment wasn't much, just a small, sparsely furnished space, with an old radiator that barely worked, but it was warm. Safe. He nudged the door open with his shoulder and carried the dog inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The silence of the apartment wrapped around them like a protective shield. He moved quickly, grabbing an old plaid blanket from the couch and spreading it near the heater. Gently, he lowered the dog onto it, adjusting the fabric to cover its bony frame. "Stay here, buddy," he murmured, though the dog made no move to get up. It just lay there, breathing in slow, measured gasps, its dark eyes still watching him with cautious curiosity. Tom ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. He needed to get the dog some water, something to eat. In the kitchen, he rummaged through the cabinets, finally finding an old can of wet dog food from months ago. It wasn't much, but it was something. He filled a bowl with lukewarm water and placed both near the dog, careful to keep his distance. The dog's nostrils flared at the scent of food, but it didn't move. Tom frowned. It was too weak, too unsure. He sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, giving the dog space. "It's okay," he murmured, voice low and steady. He didn't expect an answer, but he spoke anyway about the weather, his day at work, the squirrels that lived outside his window. The dog's ears twitched, its breathing gradually slowing, its gaze no longer darting in fear. An hour passed. Then two. The food remained untouched, but something had shifted. The dog was no longer cowering. Its muscles had relaxed just slightly. Its eyes weren't filled with as much panic as before. Tom watched as it shifted its weight, the first real movement since he brought it inside. He sighed, leaning his head back against the couch. "I don't know what happened to you," he murmured, half to himself, half to the dog. "But you're safe now." For the first time since he found the dog, its eyes fully met his, and this time, there was something different. A flicker of understanding. A sliver of trust. Tom closed his eyes, exhaustion settling over him. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do next. But for now, for this moment, he and the dog were safe. Together. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains of Tom's apartment, casting soft golden hues across the room. He groaned as he shifted on the couch, his back aching from a night spent in an uncomfortable position. The events of the previous night came rushing back as his eyes landed on the blanket near the radiator. The dog was still there, curled into a tight ball, its body rising and falling with slow, even breaths. Tom exhaled in relief. At least it had made it through the night. Stretching stiff muscles, he sat up, rubbing his face before glancing toward the food and water bowls. The water level had dipped slightly. Not much, but enough to tell him that at some point during the night, the dog had gathered enough courage to drink. The food, however, remained untouched. Tom ran a hand through his hair, already thinking of what else he could offer. Maybe something fresher, something warm. He had no idea how long it had been since this dog had eaten properly, but judging by its skeletal frame, it had been a while. As he moved toward the kitchen, he kept his motion slow, careful not to startle the dog. The shelter had taught him how to handle scared and traumatized animals. Quick movements could trigger panic. Eye contact could be seen as a challenge. He reached into his freezer and pulled out some chicken, setting it to boil while he made himself a much-needed cup of coffee. As he leaned against the counter, watching steam rise from his mug, his thoughts drifted to the shelter. He had been working there for nearly 5 years now, ever since he moved to this small city, looking for a fresh start. It wasn't a glamorous job, nor was it easy, but he loved it. Loved the feeling of making a difference, of giving animals a second chance. But the shelter had rules. Strict ones. Strays had to be reported, assessed, and processed. And if they were deemed too sick, too aggressive, or simply too difficult to rehabilitate, they were put down. The thought made his stomach twist. He had seen it happen too many times. Dogs who had never known kindness, who had spent their entire lives chained or beaten, flinching at the mere sight of a raised hand. Some with time and patience could be saved. Others never got the chance. Would this dog have been one of them? Would it have been written off as too far gone? Tom shook his head, pushing away the thought. He glanced back at the dog, which was now watching him from its spot near the radiator. Their eyes met again, and something about the way the dog held his gaze made Tom hesitate. There was intelligence there, deep and dark, as if the animal was assessing him just as much as he was assessing it. Tom exhaled slowly. "You need a name," he murmured, testing out the idea. Names had power. They turned strays into pets, into companions, into something more than just another statistic. His mind flickered through possibilities before settling on one. "Rex," he said aloud, tasting the name. It felt right. Strong. Fitting. The dog didn't react, but Tom didn't expect it to. Names took time to mean something. The chicken had cooled enough for him to tear it into small pieces. He placed them gently in a bowl and set it a little closer to Rex than the untouched dog food. Then, as before, he backed away, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a safe distance away. He sipped his coffee and waited. For a long time, Rex didn't move. His nose twitched. His ears flicked forward, but his body remained tense, his mind clearly caught between hunger and fear. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stretched his neck forward ever so slightly. Inch by inch, he closed the distance between himself and the bowl. Tom held his breath as Rex finally took a bite. He chewed slowly, cautiously, as if expecting the food to be taken away. When nothing happened, he ate another. Then another. Tom let out a slow, quiet breath. "A good boy," he murmured, keeping his voice soft. Rex's ears twitched at the praise, but he didn't retreat. That was progress. Small, but real. As the morning passed, Tom moved through his usual routine, keeping an eye on Rex, but giving him space. He checked his phone, already dreading the messages from work. He had called in sick this morning, unable to think of an excuse that didn't sound like a blatant lie. How could he explain this? That he had broken protocol, taken in a stray that should have been reported? That he had looked into those scared, dark eyes and made a split-second decision that could cost him his job? His boss, Mr. Davis, was strict but not unkind. Still, Tom knew how these things worked. Rules were rules. If someone found out about Rex before he had a plan, it wouldn't matter how much progress the dog had made. His stomach tightened at the thought. He needed time. Time to figure out what to do next. Time to earn Rex's trust. He had no idea what this dog had been through, but he was certain of one thing: he wasn't going to let it suffer again. For now, that was enough. The next few days were slow, careful steps forward. Tom made sure to keep his routine predictable, his movements deliberate, his voice steady whenever he spoke to Rex. The dog still flinched at sudden noises, doors creaking, footsteps approaching, even the jingle of keys, but he no longer shrank into himself whenever Tom moved around the apartment. That was progress. Tom spent most of his time at home, checking in on work only through brief text messages. He didn't know how long he could keep this up before someone started asking questions, but he wasn't ready to leave Rex alone yet. The German Shepherd still refused to venture beyond the blanket near the radiator, but at least now he ate without hesitation. That too was progress. One evening, as Tom sat on the couch, flipping idly through his phone, he felt a shift in the room. He looked up and nearly dropped the device. Rex had moved. The dog had been lying near the heater, as he always did, but now, instead of curling in on himself, he had stretched out slightly. More importantly, his gaze wasn't just watching Tom from a distance. It was softer, more observant than fearful. Tom swallowed hard, careful not to react too suddenly. "Hey buddy," he said quietly. Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't retreat. Tom decided to take a small risk. Slowly, deliberately, he slid off the couch and onto the floor, keeping a few feet of space between them. Rex tensed, his muscles coiling like springs, but he didn't move away. That was enough of an invitation for Tom to keep going. He extended his hand, palm up, resting it on the floor near him, but not close enough to be intrusive. He let it stay there, unmoving, an offering of trust. Rex's eyes flicked to it, then back to Tom. Seconds stretched into minutes, the air thick with quiet anticipation. Then, almost imperceptibly, Rex inched forward. Just a little. Just enough for his nose to hover above Tom's hand. The warmth of his breath ghosted over Tom's skin before, just as quickly, he pulled back. Tom didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't push. Instead, he simply let out a slow, steady exhale. "Good boy," he murmured, barely above a whisper. Rex's ears twitched again, but he didn't retreat. He didn't move closer either, but that didn't matter. Because for the first time since Tom had brought him home, Rex had made the choice to approach. And that was progress. The next night, something changed. Tom had fallen asleep on the couch, the soft hum of the radiator the only sound in the quiet apartment. Sometime past midnight, a faint pressure against his leg stirred him awake. Groggy, he blinked into the dim light, his heart skipping a beat as he realized what had happened. Rex had moved closer. Not just closer, he was right beside the couch, his head resting hesitantly against Tom's knee. The sight sent a surge of warmth through Tom's chest. He held his breath, afraid that any sudden movement would scare the dog away, but Rex didn't flinch. His body was still tense, his ears slightly flattened, but he had made the choice to be here. That meant something. Slowly, deliberately, Tom shifted his fingers and let them barely graze the soft fur between Rex's ears. The dog stiffened but didn't pull away. Encouraged, Tom moved his hand in slow, gentle strokes, feeling the raised scars beneath the matted fur. Rex let out a deep, shaky exhale, his body sinking just a little closer. It was the first real moment of trust, and Tom felt his throat tighten at the significance of it. Over the next few days, Rex started moving around the apartment more freely. He no longer stayed confined to his blanket by the radiator, occasionally venturing to follow Tom from room to room, though always at a distance. Tom pretended not to notice, giving Rex the illusion of choice. But every time he sat down, whether at the kitchen table or on the couch, the dog always settled nearby, never touching, never too close, but near enough to watch. Tom talked to him constantly, narrating his day as he cooked, cleaned, or scrolled through his phone. He didn't expect a response, but Rex listened, ears twitching at certain words. Then came the first tail wag. It was so brief that Tom almost missed it. He had just finished washing dishes when he turned to find Rex standing a few feet away, watching him. Their eyes met, and for the first time, instead of lowering his gaze, Rex hesitated. Then, just barely, his tail gave a small, uncertain flick. Tom felt something tighten in his chest. "Was that a wag?" he asked, voice light with disbelief. Rex blinked, his tail stilling, as if unsure whether he had made a mistake. Tom crouched slightly, careful not to loom over him. "That's a good boy," he murmured, his tone soft. "You're doing so good." Another hesitant flick. Tom grinned. It wasn't much. It wasn't full trust. But it was something. Tom had just started to believe that things were settling into a rhythm when the first sign of trouble appeared. It was late in the afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across his small apartment. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings. He hadn't been to work in days, and he knew he needed an excuse soon when a sharp knock at the door made both him and Rex freeze. The German Shepherd, who had been lying near the heater, lifted his head immediately, his ears shooting up in alertness. Tom's pulse quickened. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he rose to his feet, keeping his movements calm, not wanting to spook Rex. He peeked through the peephole and felt his stomach drop. A man stood outside, tall and broad-shouldered, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a thick leather jacket. His face was partially obscured by the dim lighting of the hallway, but something about his posture sent a chill through Tom's spine. He didn't recognize the guy, but his gut told him that whoever this was, he wasn't just here for a friendly chat. Tom hesitated before unlocking the door, keeping the chain latch on as he cracked it open a fraction. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. The man's gaze flicked over Tom before drifting past him, scanning the interior of the apartment. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "You got a dog in there?" His voice was deep, rough around the edges. Tom's heartbeat pounded harder. He forced himself to keep his expression blank. "Why do you ask?" The man smirked, but there was no humor in it. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me." Tom's grip on the door tightened. "I think you've got the wrong place." The man's smile disappeared. He took a step forward, and for a split second, Tom thought he might try to force his way in. But instead, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I know you have him. The dog. Big, scarred, German Shepherd. He's mine." Ice spread through Tom's veins. His mind raced. Whoever this man was, he knew about Rex. That meant he had been watching. Following. Maybe he had even been the one who left Rex tied up that night. Tom forced himself to keep his voice steady. "If you abandoned a dog, it's not yours anymore." The man let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "That's not how this works." His voice darkened, losing all pretense of friendliness. "You don't know what you're messing with." A soft growl rumbled from inside the apartment. Tom glanced back to see Rex standing now, his body tense, his ears pinned back, eyes locked onto the stranger. It was the first time Tom had seen him look like that, like he remembered something. And for the first time, Tom realized just how much danger they were in. Tom's pulse thundered in his ears as he held the door firmly in place, his knuckles white against the wood. The man outside didn't move, but his presence alone felt like a threat, like a shadow creeping into the space Tom had fought to make safe. Rex's growl deepened, his muscles coiled tight, his body halfway between fear and fight. Tom knew that if he let this escalate, Rex might panic, and he couldn't risk that. Taking a slow breath, he forced his expression to stay neutral. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave," Tom said, his voice calm but firm. The man tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the defiance. "You don't get it, do you?" he muttered. "That dog isn't some pet you can just keep. He's trained. He belongs to me." The words sent a sick feeling curling in Tom's stomach. Trained. That explained the scars, the fearful reactions, the way Rex had flinched at certain sounds. This wasn't just someone's lost pet. Rex had been used, forced into something brutal. And now, the man who had done it wanted him back. Tom swallowed down the surge of anger threatening to rise. "I don't care who you think he belongs to. You left him out there to die. That means he's not yours anymore." For a moment, the man just stared, his jaw tightening. Then, slowly he smirked. "All right," he said, taking a step back. Hands raised in mock surrender. "I get it. You want to play hero. Fine." His eyes flicked to the crack in the door, landing on Rex. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Tom slammed the door shut before he could say anything else. His breath came fast, his hands shaking as he locked it, checking the deadbolt twice. Rex was still standing, his body stiff, his eyes locked on the door as if expecting the man to come back. Tom crouched beside him, running a hand gently over the scarred fur along his back. "He's not getting you," he murmured, voice low but steady. "I won't let him." Rex didn't relax, but after a few long moments, his ears flicked slightly, acknowledging Tom's words. Tom stayed there beside him, waiting for the pounding of his heart to slow. He knew, with a sick certainty, that this wasn't over. The man had left too easily. He hadn't given up. He was planning his next move. Tom exhaled sharply, his mind racing. If he wanted to keep Rex safe, he needed to be ready. This wasn't just about hiding him anymore. It was about protecting him. And that meant fighting back. Tom barely slept that night. Every noise outside his window made his pulse spike. Every creak of the apartment settling sent his mind racing. He knew the man wasn't gone. He had left too easily, too calmly. That wasn't the reaction of someone who had given up. It was the reaction of someone who had decided to come back later, when Tom least expected it. Rex hadn't settled either. He paced the apartment, his ears twitching at every sound. The dog who had once been too afraid to move beyond his blanket, now refused to rest, his body tense and alert. Tom hated seeing him like this. Hated that the small piece of peace they had built was being torn apart. By morning, Tom had made a decision. He couldn't just sit here, waiting for the inevitable. He had to do something. He grabbed his phone and dialed the only person he could trust with this, Lisa. She answered on the second ring. "Tom?" Her voice was groggy, still thick with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Lisa, I need your help," Tom said, keeping his voice low. "Now." Something in his tone must have woken her up completely, because there was no hesitation in her response. "What's wrong?" Tom hesitated only for a second before telling her everything. About the man who had come to his door. About how he had known exactly what Rex looked like. About the way he had smirked when he left, like he already knew how this was going to end. Lisa swore under her breath. "That's bad, Tom. Really bad. If this guy is who I think he is, he's not just some random owner looking for his lost dog. He's dangerous." Tom clenched his jaw. "I know." There was a brief pause before Lisa spoke again, her voice edged with determination. "All right. First thing, we need to figure out exactly who this guy is. I can do some digging, check shelter records, maybe find out if anyone has reported dogs missing that match Rex's description. If he's involved in anything illegal, there might be a history." Tom nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Lisa said, "you need to be careful. Lock your doors. Keep your phone on you at all times. And Tom?" Her voice dropped slightly. "If this guy comes back, don't try to handle him alone." Tom exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he muttered. "Got it." After hanging up, he spent the rest of the morning preparing. He installed an old security camera he had lying around, positioning it to cover the front entrance. He reinforced the lock on his door. And he kept a baseball bat within arm's reach. Hours passed. The tension in the air remained. Every time he glanced at Rex, the dog was watching the door, his body still stiff with unease. Tom didn't know when the man would come back. But he knew one thing for sure: when he did, Tom would be ready. The first sign that something was wrong came just after midnight. Tom had been sitting on the couch, his laptop open, but his mind too restless to focus. Rex had finally curled up beside him, his body no longer trembling, though his ears still twitched at every distant sound. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Then, the motion sensor on the security camera sent an alert to Tom's phone. His stomach tightened as he grabbed it, his pulse hammering as he tapped the screen. The grainy black and white footage showed the parking lot outside his building. A figure moved near the entrance, just outside the glow of the streetlights. Tom's breath caught. The man was back. He shot up from the couch, heart pounding. Rex lifted his head instantly, sensing the shift in the air. Tom didn't need to speak. The dog was already on edge, his eyes locked on the door. Another notification. The camera picked up the movement again. This time, the man was closer. Tom's mind raced. He could call the police, but by the time they arrived, It might be too late. And if this guy was willing to break in, there was no telling what he was capable of. A sharp noise cracked through the silence. The doorknob rattled. Tom grabbed the baseball bat, gripping it tightly as he moved toward the door. His pulse roared in his ears. Rex was on his feet now, his body tense, a deep growl building in his chest. The rattling stopped. A pause. Then, a loud bang as the door shuttered under a heavy impact. Tom's breath came fast. He braced himself, bat raised, but before he could act, Rex lunged. The German Shepherd launched toward the door with a furious bark, his body slamming against it so hard that the entire frame shook. Another snarl ripped from his throat, louder, deeper than anything Tom had heard from him before. It wasn't fear, it was rage. A second passed. Then another. Silence. Tom held his breath, listening. Outside, footsteps scrambled backward. A muttered curse. Then the unmistakable sound of someone running. Tom rushed to the peephole, his heart still hammering. The man was retreating down the hallway, his form vanishing into the shadows. Tom exhaled sharply, his entire body shaking with adrenaline. He didn't know if Rex's reaction had scared him off or if the man had simply realized breaking in wasn't worth the risk. But either way, he was gone. For now. He turned to Rex, who was still standing by the door, his body heaving with heavy breaths. His tail was low, his ears pinned back, but his eyes burned with something fierce. He wasn't the same broken, terrified dog Tom had brought home. Not anymore. Tom crouched beside him, running a hand gently over his back. "You saved us, buddy," he murmured. Rex let out a deep sigh, his muscles slowly relaxing. But Tom knew this wasn't over. The man would come back. And next time, he wouldn't run. They had to end this before it was too late. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat on the couch, his fingers gripping his phone tightly as he scrolled through messages from Lisa. She had spent the past few hours digging, and what she found made Tom's stomach turn. The man's name was Derek Marshall, a known figure in illegal dog fighting rings. He had been investigated multiple times, but had never been convicted. Every report mentioned the same thing: dogs found with scars, cigarette burns, and trauma so deep they never fully recovered. Tom didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Rex had been one of those dogs. The realization sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through him. He glanced at Rex, who had finally curled up on his blanket, his breathing steady but his body still tense. Tom exhaled slowly. He had to act now, before Derek tried something worse. He sent Lisa a message: "We need to stop him." Her response came instantly: "I have a plan. Meet me tomorrow." The next day, Tom drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of town, his grip tight on the steering wheel. Rex sat beside him in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning every movement outside the window. Tom reached over and gave him a reassuring scratch behind the ears. "We're gonna end this," he murmured. Lisa was already waiting when they arrived, a folder full of documents spread out on the table in front of her. She didn't waste time. "I found an animal rights lawyer who's been tracking cases like this," she said, tapping one of the papers. "She's agreed to take this on pro bono. We also have a journalist, Sarah Chun. She's been looking for a lead on these underground rings for months. If we can get her enough information, she can blow this whole thing open." Tom nodded, his determination hardening. "What do we need?" Lisa slid a piece of paper across the table. "Proof. More than just one dog. We need something concrete to link Derek to this operation." Tom's jaw clenched. Proof. That meant digging deeper. That meant risking more. But as he looked down at Rex, who sat obediently beside him, his scars a reminder of the suffering he had endured, Tom knew there was no other choice. He was going to take Derek Marshall down. That night, Tom and Lisa put their plan into motion. Lisa had managed to find an old warehouse address linked to Derek's name, an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. If he was still running dogfights, this was the place to check. Tom knew it was dangerous, but waiting wasn't an option. They needed proof, and they needed it now. He left Rex with Lisa, not willing to risk bringing him anywhere near that place. "Stay with him," Tom said, crouching beside Rex and running a hand through his fur. "I'll be back soon." Rex's ears flattened slightly, as if sensing the tension, but he didn't move. He trusted Tom. Tom drove in silence, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel as he neared the warehouse. The building loomed in the darkness, its rusted metal siding barely illuminated by a few flickering floodlights. He parked at a distance and made his way closer on foot, keeping low, his heart pounding in his chest. From outside, he could hear the muffled sounds of barking multiple dogs, their cries sharp and desperate. His fists clenched. This was it. He crept toward a broken window, carefully peering inside. The sight made his stomach turn. Cages lined the walls, each one holding a dog, some large, muscular, their bodies covered in scars, others smaller, cowering in the corners. In the center of the room, Derek stood talking to two other men, exchanging what looked like cash. Tom pulled out his phone and started recording, his hands shaking with adrenaline. This was the proof they needed. A sudden sound behind him made him freeze. A boot scraping against gravel. Before he could turn, rough hands grabbed his collar and yanked him backward. He hit the ground hard, pain jolting through his ribs as Derek loomed over him, his smirk cruel. "You really thought you could mess with me?" Derek sneered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Tom gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He had to stall, had to buy time. But then, distant sirens cut through the night air. Derek's face twisted in anger. "You called the cops?" Tom coughed, forcing a smirk. "Not me." Derek cursed, his grip tightening, but the flashing red and blue lights were already flooding the lot. Tires screeched. Officers shouted. Chaos erupted as Derek's men scrambled to escape. Tom felt the grip on his shirt loosen as Derek shoved him away and bolted. He gasped for air, rolling onto his side as he watched officers swarm the building, rescuing the caged dogs. Relief crashed over him, but it wasn't over yet. Because Derek was still out there. And Tom wasn't going to stop until he was caught.